Three, two, one.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GraniteGrok.com. We are your feared extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone-stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GraniteGrok.com.
Grok Talk.
All right, this is Grok Talk. Trying to skip putting on his microphone, and I didn't have it turned down. Sorry about that. Hey, you're all tied up. Nice job. Welcome back to Grok Talk, brought to you by the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers and the bloggers at GraniteGrok.com. Coming to you live on several locations and post-production in the podcast form on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, and iHeartRadio.
Ustream and YouTube.
Ustream and YouTube, and at GraniteGrok.com, where you will hear all kinds of stuff, including our earlier guest today, Londonderry Fishing Game Club President Rick Olson. Emily Sandblade was here to talk about some interesting things, and we're going to keep the ball rolling with our next guest, John Lieber, who is the chief economist at Thumbtack.com. He has a very impressive resume, including the American Enterprise Institute and a whole bunch of stuff as a consultant for government. Good morning, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you guys?
Great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Why don't you give our listeners just a brief background on you, and then let's talk about Thumbtack.com and the Small Business Survey.
Cool. Yeah, so just briefly about me, I was a government policy advisor for many years before I moved back home to the great state of California to work for this company called Thumbtack. And what Thumbtack does is connects people to small business service providers, so people who are looking for dog walkers, to plumbers, to electricians, to math tutors. And since we have this network of small businesses, what we do is we ask them how they feel about their government every year. And so we've done this now for 4 years running. And this year, the state of New Hampshire was the number 2 state for small business in our survey.
It looks pretty good. We got an A+. I'm looking at it. It looks really pretty. Now, I know this is limited, obviously, to the number of small businesses that you have associated with Thumbtack. But I think that maybe those are the best people to talk to, because these are probably people who really are having some of the smallest businesses and are really, sensitive to changes in government policy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think this is a population of very small service providers, so 90% have 5 or fewer employees. And I think these are people who are either just starting out on their own or maybe have been in business for several years for themselves. But, they're not making a ton of profit. They're not raking in cash. These aren't going to be people who are getting exceptionally wealthy. These are people who are making a living by running a small business. And so these small changes in policy can make a huge difference to them. They don't have a lot of help complying with the rules. They don't have like a team of lawyers that can help them understand where to find, how to renew their license or how to do their taxes. So it's a group that is very independent and where government regulations can really make a big difference to their success or not.
Now, you have over 18,000 participating in the national survey. What would you say are the top 3, 4, 5 things that they talk about when they complete the surveys that have the most impact on their business?
So we ask a general question, how friendly is your government for small business? And then we look at the other factors we ask about, and we try to determine which of those factors has the biggest effect on their answer to that question about how friendly the business is. So the goal of the survey is really to understand from their own perspective what makes for a friendly state or local government. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing we found this year was actually a little surprising to me. It was the presence of kind of proactive business training programs. So a lot of our businesses are pretty small, pretty isolated businesses, and they really appreciate it when there's either a government or like a civic institution that offers training programs that helps them meet other people in their field, helps them understand how to find new customers or how to run their business better. And that was actually the number one factor this year.
I noticed in New Hampshire we see we're in the weeds here in New Hampshire as far as the politics and the taxes and everything else. I mean, we're broadcasting 2-3 blocks from the State House. We have 400 House representatives. We know lots of them. We've met all of our congressional delegation pretty much, unless they were the Democrat side, because they don't want to talk to us for some reason because we're conservatives. But
they know us all by our first names.
They all know us by first name. They know who we are. They respond to the things that we do. So we're very interfaced with our government, and I can understand that, and so as a result, we talk to business leaders in varying degrees, and they talk about the business tax situation in New Hampshire, which is, we rely heavily on business taxes, and there is licensing, although it's not nearly as bad as we'd like to think it is, and certainly, a lot of regulatory issues, but there's no sales tax, and the income tax is embedded in kind of into the business tax formula. But the things that people were excited about here were training opportunities, where we were graded as B-, and licensing enforcement, which is, I guess, different from licensing. We talk about licensing a lot. I'm not even sure if I can get into that. And then labor regulations, which I'm honestly not that familiar with. But not everybody is as comfortable with their state government as we are. I mean, we talk to these business leaders. They show up at hearings. They walk into the State House. They talk to one of their 400 House reps, or they know their senator. And it's not like that in every state. So, I don't know. I'm not even sure where I'm going with this. I lost my train of thought on the way.
Well, let me see if I can help. That's interesting. I think that's not really the case for a lot of small business owners across most of the country, that they have a deep familiarity with the political process or the politicians that help make the rules. So you guys are really fortunate in that sense, because your lawmakers are hearing directly from people on a constant basis about what the big hassles are with them. And that's just not the case. Like in a big state like California or even Florida, New York, these people just don't have access. So this is a group of people who aren't frequently heard from. They don't have like a trade organization speaking for them, and it's just very difficult for them to get their voices heard. Which is why it's one of the cool things about the survey is that we're offering a chance for these voices to be amplified. You brought up licensing. And that's actually one of the biggest issues for our professionals, because a lot of them are in fields where they're required to hold a license, and the state governing board or sometimes the county regulations make it very difficult to get and maintain that license. And that's actually such a big issue for our pros that it ranks higher than tax rates when you ask about what makes for a friendly government. The presence and difficulty of licensing rules is nationally one of the biggest things that can really either frustrate or help government become friendlier to small business.
With this president administration, this is Skip, by the way, and thanks for coming on the show. It's certainly the mission of this administration to, and I've been saying this for a while, almost copy what was done in Italy in the 1930s, where they certainly don't want to necessarily own the means of productions, but they have certainly ratcheted down, just thousands, hundreds of thousands of regulations, to the point where some industries and certainly some businesses are becoming nothing more than public utilities at the behest of the government. Is this something that you are noticing? They've been doing it at the large end, mostly, but are you seeing this as a growing influence and a growing concern at the low end with these small businesses?
So what we found is that for the most part, our businesses aren't really subject to federal regulations. The federal government kind of leaves them alone. And they're just too small to pop on the radar. There's certain cases where, there's some environmental rules somebody has to follow. If they're in junk hauling or interstate moving or something like that, there are a handful of federal regulations that affect them. But really, these businesses are on such a scale that state and local rules that really apply. One thing I will say this administration did recently is they released a really terrific paper on the effects that professional licensure has on small business and business generally, and they made some really great recommendations for reform. Acknowledging that there's not a lot they can do at the federal level, they kind of outline some best practices at the state and local level that could be followed to help make licensing easier and less burdensome for small businesses.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm curious about, since most doctors, or up until the Obama administration and Obamacare, many doctors had their own practices, maybe a very small group practice, but we're seeing their elimination from the marketplace because of the federal regulations, and that they are being absorbed by either larger practices or, in most of the cases, by hospitals or hospital chains. And do you see this possibility happening now in the energy field, where some of these smaller wildcatters or some other manufacturers are going to get rolled up because they're about to do in the energy sector what they did in the healthcare sector?
Oh, that's a great question. question, and we don't directly deal with a lot of energy producers because we are primarily a service marketplace.
Okay.
However, my understanding of the situation with the wildcat, as you talked about, is it's a pretty precarious business with a lot of risk involved in it.
Right.
And anything from some new government regulation that wants to limit fracking to the Saudis deciding to keep the price of oil low and the OPEC cartel could really affect these guys' livelihoods. So I'm sure that there's a deep sensitivity to any new regulation that comes out from the federal government there.
Do you see anything? I know you just talked about the report from the federal government about licensing at the state level, just kind of as a guideline. And I think I've seen that report. I may have written about it at watchdog.org. I'm trying to remember. So many blog posts, so little time. Have you heard of any response at the state level? Like, I know obviously the survey, you are surveying businesses who are reacting to situations at the state level. But as an economist and somebody who's been involved in government, have you heard of any states in particular that are really trying to work on the problem of excessive licensing?
I think, it's funny you ask. It's hard. I think it's really hard. There's definitely an interest at the state level. There's certainly an interest amongst kind of policymakers at the federal level in doing something about this issue, as there's a growing recognition of what a burden it is on middle-class business owners who are being kept out of professions because of these licensing rules. But when it comes down to the rubber on the road at the state level, these licensed bodies can become their own little protectorates, where they sort of protect the people who are in the cartel and exclude those who are not. So it's very difficult at the state and even the local level to try to reform these. I know one example is that in your neighboring state of Maine, there's a body that was formed maybe a decade or so ago that kind of weighs the costs and benefits of new regulations, and that has slowed down the flood of new licenses. It hasn't really done a lot to re-examine the old ones yet. And there's a couple other examples inside that report from the White House of states that are attempting at least to try to deal with this problem.
Right, and the regulations cover everything from taxis to hair braiding, and taxi licenses have some merit, but it's caused a closed shop that's attempting to keep competition out, and some of the cosmetic trades really make very little sense. Either the people get a good reputation or they don't.
Yeah, there's this other model that I'm a big fan of, where instead of requiring a license, you offer a professional certification. So instead of saying, in order to practice, profession X in this state, you have to have this license. It says, if you practice profession X, you are certified that you are a quality provider. And that is more like a signal to the consumer that this is a good person. Online reviews can often fill the same function, where you say, I need to hire a plumber. Plumbers need to be licensed for certain things, but to snake a drain or unclog a sink or something like that, you really don't need a license for that kind of thing. But this guy's certified in a certain way, or he's got enough reviews online to tell me he's a legit provider. So there's actually quite a number of alternatives to professional licensing. And with all the new technology that's out there today, there's way more transparency in the service industry than there ever was in the past. So these kind of models of licensing are really outdated for a large number of professions.
I've got a question that we may have to get the question out and then get the answer after the break. My wife and I ran a daycare center, very small. We were in that middle trough where you really don't want to be, where the profitability was like 1 or 2 kids per day type of deal. But I saw firsthand when you had a regulatory environment from the state, because daycare is highly regulated, that when they want to be helpful to help you be better, it was very helpful. And then the administration changed, the politics changed, and then they were out to get you, to where one of my favorite stories is I got dinged for not having a temperature gauge in a freezer that I wasn't using. So the question comes up, do you see any kind of movement within the states to go from take all prisoners possible, or we're going to have a mentorship kind of deal? Do you see any kind of movement between those two, from the take every prisoner we can get to more of a, here's the regulations, let's help you try to meet those?
I think it kind of depends on the administration, right? So a lot of this stuff, enforcement especially, is at the discretion of whomever's in charge. And a lot of time, enforcement can come just because, the bureaucracy is moving and that's just what it does, so they enforce things like that. But a lot of times some governments you'll see will come in and they'll make a conscious choice to not go after rinky-dink little violations like that. And I think that's kind of the description that we rely on to keep our government functioning. There's so many rules out there that you really just need someone who understands in office, who's willing to kind of say, this is what we actually think is really important for safety and these things are not. But I'm unaware of a national movement that would encapsulate, that would help there. But it's certainly, I think just talking about these stories, getting them out there, making sure people are aware of the kind of tiny little things that can trip you up and how hard it is to run a business today is a really important part of kind of our mission here. I think it's really important that we keep talking about it so people know what's going on.
All right, John, hang on the line. We're going to take a really short break. We'll be right back in just a little over a minute. Everybody stay tuned.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Hi, this is Rich Gerard, host of Gerard at Large in the Morning, the Manchester area's only locally owned, locally operated, focused, and interested, riveting radio show, heard live every Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 on 90.7 FM WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio, and available 24/7 live or archived at gerardatlarge.com. Be sure to tune in.
Rock Talk.
All right, it's Grok Talk. We have Chief Economist John Lieber on the phone from Thumbtack.com. Thumbtack's a great organization. I've actually used them. I needed to get the power connector in the back of my laptop fixed, the one that was making the sound worse.
Yes.
Buzzing noise that we were hearing on the air. And I actually used Thumbtack. And I found a guy in Florida who would do it cheap and fast. And I sent it out on a Tuesday morning, and I had it back before the show on Saturday. So it's great service. I think that people are used to some of the other companies that they've heard of that are a little bit more. They've been around longer. But if you need something done locally, it's a great place to reach out and just put up a little, say, hey, you stick a Thumbtack. You go, I need this service in this area, and anybody who's nearby who's willing to do it will reach out to you and start to negotiate the terms of the service and so on and so forth. So it's very useful, and it's nice to see that they're taking this opportunity to get all these small business owners, because a lot of them are. The guy that I used, this is what he does. I don't know if it's his full-time job or if he just does it on the side, but he makes a living. It supplements his income. So I think a lot of the people that we're talking about here as far as the survey goes are folks just like that. Does that sound about right, John? Absolutely,
yeah. What I think is most interesting about the service providers you see on Thumbtack is we have, so a lot of them are established businesses. About 45% have been in business for 5 years or more. But there's also a lot of folks who, maybe that guy, he works in the IT department of a small company in Florida, and he wants to start off on his own, but he doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't know where to find customers. He doesn't know where to get started. So come to Thumbtack, suddenly people start sending him jobs, and suddenly the dream of being a business owner, working for himself, doesn't seem that far away. So what I really love about the service is our ability to kind of help people get started on their own, realize their dreams, do their own thing. And, these are skilled professionals. These are people who have a skill they're very good at, and they're able to share that with their community. And it's really, I think it's fantastic to be able to empower people to have that kind of opportunity in their lives.
John, what has been your rate of growth year over year over the last few years? With tens of thousands of businesses, you had to start off somewhere small. But how fast is your particular business growing as far as expanding this marketplace you're talking about?
We're growing pretty fast. I can't get into specific numbers. I believe we have over 1 million people signed up on the site, professionals, and we have about 150,000 active small businesses on the platform a month. So we have a lot of people coming through and using this. And our request growth is growing as well. So we've got a lot of new people coming through, discovering the service and meeting new small business owners.
So would you describe your growth rate at 5% a year, 10% a year, or is there any kind of just to get a sense of how much this service is needed? Because certainly Steve was happy to use it.
Yeah, it's fast. We think it's about nationally, we think that the areas that we cover are about a $700 billion market. So it's a big, big marketplace. And you see a lot of other providers getting into the space. Amazon's got a competitor. Google's trying to launch a competitor. Angie's List has been here for a very, very long time. Yelp is in the local service rating. So there's a lot of businesses that are in a similar space, but no one does exactly what we do, which is match you directly with professionals who can help you get your jobs done.
Is anybody else doing small business surveys?
Good question. Well, there's a couple established ones that are out there, but they're mostly from trade organizations. So the National Federation of Independent Businesses does a survey every month where they kind of take a pulse of the economic environment for small businesses. A lot of those businesses tend to be larger businesses, though, and they'll be kind of more established in retail and manufacturing, whereas we focus almost exclusively on service businesses.
What else is really big for these small business owners? Obviously, they're not interfacing with government, as we've discussed, and you did say licensing. What would you say is next as far as concerns them?
Well, I'll tell you something that surprised me that was small, which is tax rates. So we actually asked about the effect of, basically asked, how do you feel about the tax burden that you pay? And for the most part, a majority of people tell us that they're pretty comfortable with the tax rate they pay. And when we look at how the tax rate affects their perceptions of their local government, it turns out it's not a very big factor at all. And what's a much bigger factor is the difficulty in understanding complying with those tax rules. And so what that leads us to conclude is that the attention paid to tax rates may be a little oversized, because what actually matters is sort of the time cost and difficulty in complying and understanding what the tax rules are. And, at first that really surprised me, but then I thought about it a little bit, and it seems like, the tax is just money out of the pocket, and people will pay that. They understand that paying taxes is part of the cost of doing business. They may not be happy about it. They may want taxes to be lower, but it's just something they kind of accept. But what becomes really frustrating is when you have to spend, a week around tax time, sitting around the table, looking at all your expenses, trying to make everything add up and understand what the rules are. If you're in a state where they have a sales tax on services, you've got to try to comply with that. And it can become a real burden on these small business owners who, again, aren't people with a ton of resources. They don't have an accounting department. Maybe they have an outside accountant, or maybe they use QuickIn or TurboTax or something like that. But every hour they have to spend in this process is a real drag on them. It's a time they're not spent building their business. They're not helping a client out, and they're not earning a living for their family. So it's a really this kind of time cost is a real burden for them.
Well, I work for a software manufacturing company that deals with small to almost really huge manufacturing firms. And I'll tell you, it's a pain even for us to try to keep up with all the tax laws. And a lot of our customers, we have, for them, we have interfaced with companies who do nothing but tax compliance, so that when they get ready to generate their invoices, all of their numbers for a particular invoice, for instance, go out to the cloud where they're computed, because they're doing business all over the places. And when you look at the federal taxes, the state level taxes, the county level, the local level in some cases, the compliance of all that stuff is just crazy. And when I first started there and learned about this, I went, this is absolutely nuts. And then as a political blogger, our cost of compliance altogether is approaching $2 trillion a year, which compliance is just as bad as the taxes.
Yeah, in some ways it's worse, because it's not like, at least taxes, you tax me, you take my income, and you give it to somebody else, fine, they spend the money. This is just sunk cost. This is just money that's taken away, from productivity. It's just taken away from people who are creating things and given to people who help us deal with complexity, like lawyers and accountants. And it's just a dead weight loss for society that serves no productive good. So it's in a lot of ways, it's worse than the money out of pocket.
One of the funny stories that I haven't yet written about was that Trump has basically said, I'm going to make a flat tax and get rid of a couple of the outside tax preparers. And some fool wrote a post. he's going to get rid of 80,000 jobs. How can he call himself a job creator when all of these people who help individuals do their taxes, they're all going to lose their jobs? And I'm thinking, this person has no idea what it takes.
Free up a lot of money.
Yeah, free up a lot of money.
Destruction. People put to better use.
Yeah, this is nothing more than, government saying you have to have these parasites, and I use that word judiciously and, purposefully, that this is a weight against the economy that is totally government imposed versus, this shouldn't be here. So my personal feeling is if they all went away, all these tax preparers, I'd be a happy camper. But just for political purposes, they're trying to slam some of these people saying a flat tax, the fair tax, or what have you, which reduces your income tax and business tax to a postcard almost.
Yeah, I'd rather that my tax preparer wasn't preparing taxes, but was in fact helping small businesses with their accounts. So there were more businesses open and less people having to do taxes. I don't necessarily call the people at H&R Block parasites, for example, unless I was to find that the management of H&R Block was lobbying for more tax complexity to increase their revenue.
They actually did with Obamacare, believe it or not. But John, what's your take on that type of small story, given that we are in the silly season for the presidential election?
In terms of tax reform and how to fix the system?
Well, and the job marketplace that has grown up because the government has distorted the marketplace, if you want to call it that, for gathering taxes.
You're going to have to answer it in a minute.
Sure. I'll give my quick answer about which actually has to do with automation, which is kind of an interesting thing. If you think about kind of traditional tax preparers for small businesses, they were these accountants, they were professionals, they had a shingle, they hung out, they wore green eye shades, they were this kind of traditional view of an accountant. But technology has advanced so far that a lot of the traditional accounting practices can now be done with a software package, like the one you're talking about. So when you think about these jobs in the accounting world, you're starting to see a destruction of sort of these middle-class professional jobs and moving it towards these people who are just basically running software tools. And this is a good example of how software is kind of moving its way up the value chain in society and displacing a lot of workers today. So when you think about the jobs that are being lost because of tax compliance, if you were to simplify the system, they may not be the jobs that you think they are. So it's sort of a tangent, but it's kind of an interesting trend that's happening in the economy today.
Well, John, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much for getting up early and spending some time with us. I know you're in California. You're in California, right?
I'm in California, yep.
All right. Well, it's still early there, so enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for spending some time with us.
Great, guys. Thanks so much for talking. I really appreciate it.
All righty. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, that was John Lieber, Chief Economist, Thumbtack.com, doing a little chatting about some small business stuff. This is Grok Talk. We'll be back next week with at least Rick Olson. We already know that, and we look forward to talking to you again. Make sure you tune in. Check out the podcast, granitegrok.com. We're there every day, and you guys have a great weekend.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.